Hi everyone, in today's video we're going to talk about writing music for placement libraries. A lot of people reach out to me asking questions about them, and I wanted to make this video to shed some light on it. Now, as a composer for mixed media, I write for documentaries, narratives, short films, commercials, etc., all those things. But in between projects, I write for placement libraries. Now, first and foremost, writing for placements is a great way to build passive income, and it's great to keep your chops up. Now, the thing that people need to remember when it comes to placements is there's a couple ways to go about doing it. You can write generic, quirky music that can get placements all the time, and that's great. For some people, that's not the type of music that I like to write. I'm more approaching it from a sniper as opposed to a shotgun. So I'm writing very poignant music that may get only a couple placements, but the placements will be higher quality than quantity. And so I'm writing music that will be used in a trailer or used in a TV show, etc., that will bring more yield financially. So how I go about doing that from the approach of that is when I write music for a placement company, first thing is they typically have you write anywhere from 1 to 10 tracks of music. And so if I'm working on a whole album of placement library music, the first thing I need to determine is what the sound is going to be. Now, typically the placement library will give me an idea of what they're looking for, and I will kind of go in that direction for the whole album. I'll use similar instrumentation and orchestration throughout. But the main thing I do right out the gate is imagine a story. I write from scripts a lot, so that's not very difficult for me to use my imagination in that way. But starting out, if you're not used to writing from a blank page, more or less, it can be difficult. But what I try to do is imagine a story in my head, an arc. And so each piece of music is telling that story, and I'm also pulling colors from the visuals, looking at them, so I can say, okay, well, this is the color and this is the texture, and these are the pieces of sounds that I'm going to complement those colors or these textures. From there, I have the story, I have the instrumentation, I have the instruments I want to use. After that, I need to realize that I want this to be unique. Now, if I wanted to write music that was more mainstream, generic, which, like I said, is fine, but it's not my business model. I want something that's unique, that sounds exciting, that sounds fresh, that makes someone go back and listen, what was that sound, or how did they do that? And so that's the next thing. First, it's the story. Second, it's the sound. And those two in tandem, I find, yield great results for me. Now, they may not work for you, like I said, but they work for me. And I wanted to showcase two different little projects that I've worked on, different projects, different companies that I've worked for, but the overall arc is still the same. It's a story that I've developed in my head, and I wanted something that's unique, and I wanted something that would make someone listen and go, oh, that's interesting, because there's so much noise, and to be able to pull away from the noise, to push through the noise, is what will get you a placement. And so the first piece we're going to look at is from the album that I did called Gateway. The track in particular that we're looking at is called Pacing Towards Darkness. The reason I chose this is because there's some really interesting textures that I created, some with virtual instruments and some with my analog synthesizers, that stand apart. And so I wanted to show this one first, so let's jump on in. comes the melody. Free VST. So harmonically, there's not a lot going on. It's really simple. But it's just more or less developing this texture, this vibe, with these kind of unique sounds. Comes the final portion, harmony change. And then we have the fade out. So I want to show you some of the textures that I think make this piece stand out. And the first one is this analog strings VST from output. And it sounds like this. So it's this really high-pitched, glassy synthesizer sound. And it's got this really nice reverb. I did a little bit of EQing and tweaking to it, but it's pretty close to the original sound. The other really cool sound that I really enjoy, that's one of the main things on this cue, is this instrument right here. It's just a VST Labs, also a free plugin. And it sounds like a wind-up toy. I did some EQing to it to bring up the highs. But this is a free VST. And it's one of the main unique sounds in this piece. It's just a very interesting texture. And then I also have these sounds right here that I made with my KORG MS-20. The first one being this sound, which is one of the main sounds that cascades throughout the whole piece. And I put a filter on it, just a basic Logic filter. Then the other thing is this guy, which has got a lot to it. It's another MS-20 sound. It's a sequence that I made with a step sequencer. And I ran it through, put it through a bit crusher, and then jacked the EQ up pretty high. So we're getting a lot of those artifacts on top. That's really cool. So that combined with this, combined with this, combined with this, give you the main kind of sound of this piece. The other thing that I haven't showed yet is this sound right here, which I made with my OB6, and it's more of a pad sound, and I shelved it, so meaning I took a lot of the highs out of it, but I ran it also through a bit crusher and through this free plugin that emulates a Juno chorus, which sounds fantastic. And here's what that sounds like. So it's a very kind of unique textural sound. And if you notice, there are no drums in this whole piece, but there's constant movement. And I didn't want drums in this, especially for trailer music, because there's lots of hits and things. in trailer music, and so sometimes editors will like to put those in, or they'll like to just use different little sections from your cue, different little stems, and then put their own hits to it and things like that. So having sonic space and having these kind of unique sounds, I think is a great way to kind of separate yourself and also make the job easy for the editor, because they'll have their own stabs and sounds that they like. So they can put those over top of these things to give energy. And so in regards to the percussion, I have these kind of sounds providing the percussion. So I have this sound that I have with another analog strings plugin. I have this sound with also the analog strings plugin. It's a ticking sound. Just an interesting little pulse sound. Down here, I have this sequence that I made with my OB6 to provide movement. And then, regarding the final thing, is this bass line. And this is from a company called Newfangled Audio. I think they work in correlation with Eventide Audio. But it's a VST, and I made the bass sounds with this, and it sounds fire. And then I also have the Moog providing the sub bass. So I have the attack from this, and then the sub from this. So it's providing the foundation and the percussive motion. So that in conjunction with the OB6 sequence, the ticking sound, this right here, this gives you a lot of that percussive movement without having drums. So it adds a nice little layer to it. And so what I mean finally by just making unique sounds, this piece in particular, if I just pull some of these sounds at random together and build them, here's another sound from the Newfangled Audio, the nice big reverby sound. If I combine that with the MS-20 sound that I made, do you see how all these different little pieces, while it's kind of like pointillism, while they all are working together to provide this story with music, I can pull them at random and they still have different emotional responses. And see, that's the thrust of this whole piece, this whole conversation, honestly, is making unique sounds that are supportive of one another, that can be intertwined together to create different melodic and textural ideas. I could play this whole piece without the piano, and it would have a very different sound. I could play it without all the percussion. I could play it with just the percussion. It's very transformative in nature, and that's the way that I go about writing music for placements, because I'm trying to approach it from the idea of the editor. The editor wants to create something that has a lot of engagement, forward motion, and uniqueness. And so having that space for them can really help them. And so now I want to show the next piece. And so for the next piece, we're going to take a look at a cue that I wrote for another placement company. And I wanted something very unique for this first one. Surprisingly enough, I ended up using two very odd sounds. One being mouthpieces. Some atonal stuff. Those mouthpieces really add to the vibe, which is the first thing I want to showcase. I have some other cool little sounds that I made with my MS-20. So there's two parts to this piece. We have the opening section and we have this last section. The last section, a lot of energy kicks in here. And the other thing that I want to feature is about to show up too. And it's in the melody. Here it is. adding to the mystery with the harmony that I chose in the piano. These are two soundscapes that I made. I don't remember how I made them, but yeah. That's the joy of making a lot of sounds, is that you forget how you made them sometimes, especially if you don't label them. The two main things in this track, we'll do two with some honorable mentions. How about that? The first being the mouthpieces, and they're tucked super low. All I did was just EQ them, put some reverbs on them, which you're not hearing right now because they're bypassed. And yeah, I just added them to provide some earthy textures to it. It adds a lot to it, actually, if you listen to it without it. With it. See, it just adds this otherworldly kind of sound that I was really going for this. And it really complements the atonal piano melody. The other cool things, the honorable mentions on this, is this sound that I made with my MS-20. Those two sounds. I just overdrove the filter, and then I used the filter sweep. Just a nice little texture. It's not the star, obviously. But the star of this is actually a bass guitar. Mouthpieces, trumpet mouthpieces, and bass guitar. Those are the two main things I want to show on this. Bet you wouldn't think a bass guitar would be a main melody, but it is. Now the bass guitar is joined by the MS-20, playing similar microtonal bends. It's just in half steps as opposed to big kind of lyrical sweeps, but similar sounds. And that goes through the whole rest of the piece. And the last honorable mention is this drum groove, actually. It starts with the OB6 snare sound. Have this kind of cool rise that thing. Then we have just the drum groove right here. But the real MVP of the drum groove are these two free VSTs from Labs by Spitfire. First one is the London Atmos, and the other one is this Whalesong. There's just so many little pieces, and I could solo different pieces out together and it'd be the same thing as the last cue that I showed you. But the same thing still reigns true for this cue. The reason that I think it works well is because it does tell a story, but it also uses unique sounds, and I'm doing something that's unconventional to create unique sounds. And I think that's what kind of gives this piece of music a leg up over some of the other cues out there that editors or directors would want to use in a project. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like I mentioned, the main takeaway is to, one, have an idea in your head when you're writing music and have some kind of story development, especially if you're going to be writing multiple pieces of music. Even if it's just one piece of music, imagine a scene, pull from different stills from films that you enjoy, and use those as your playground. I envision music with colors, so having those different colors to look at while I'm writing really helps me with my imagination. And the second thing being, you want your music to be memorable. You want something that will stick out. So ways to go about doing that are thinking unconventionally. I use mouthpieces in one cue. I used an Ebow. I made very interesting sounds with VSTs and with synthesizers. Whatever your instrument is, try to think outside the box. Create unique music that evokes emotion. That will pull you ahead and pull you apart from the rest of the competition. Because at the end of the day, it's a numbers game. There's so much music out there, and your job is to create music that evokes emotion, but also making music that is enticing to an editor and to a director. Something that's unique, that will help it stand out. And remember to leave space for editors to be able to put in other sounds that they enjoy underneath it, because you don't want too much competing sound. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this was informative to you in some way. There's a link above to previous videos I've done in case you want to check them out. But until then, please like, subscribe, ring the bell, and I'll see you all next time.